Dr. Michelle Carter slid the black leather sleeve of her tablet into her sleek, gray briefcase, the last echo of applause still ringing softly in her ears. The conference center's grand hall had been packed with aviation professionals, journalists, and industry executives, eyes fixed on her as she delivered the closing keynote on aviation safety protocols and emerging technologies. She'd handled the pressure like she always did, poised, precise, unflappable. Now, stepping out into the bustling terminal of Dulles International Airport, Michelle allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The late afternoon sun filtered through the massive glass panes, casting warm squares of light over the marble floor. Travelers rushed past in every direction, weaving through the maze of gate signs and luggage carts. Michelle moved with purpose, her tailored navy pantsuit catching subtle glints from the polished floors. Her heels clicked a steady rhythm. The wear of the past 3 days' endless meetings, debates, and speeches was now subsiding, replaced by the anticipation of home. Her phone buzzed quietly in her purse. A message from her daughter, Tessa, "Can't wait to see you. Dinner's ready when you get in." A small smile touched Michelle's lips. The chaos of her job could feel overwhelming, but moments like this grounded her. She approached the check-in kiosk for Air Dominion, the airline she preferred for its reliability and service. The screen brightened under her touch, and soon she was holding her boarding pass, a first-class ticket from Washington to Atlanta. She headed toward security, her pace unhurried but steady. The TSA line was surprisingly short, and within minutes Michelle was back on the other side, navigating toward Gate B22. She admired the calm professionalism of the airport staff, everyone working together to keep the system moving like clockwork. It was the kind of environment she thrived in, efficient, predictable. At the gate, the line to board was forming. Michelle kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, headphones tucked into her purse, and focused on her breathing. She had no time for small talk or distractions. When the boarding announcement came, she moved with the flow of passengers, toward the front of the line where the first-class section awaited. The flight attendants stood by the door, greeting travelers with practiced smiles. "Good afternoon, Dr. Carter," a young woman with a neat bun and bright eyes said warmly. "Welcome aboard. If you'd like, I can help you find your seat." Michelle nodded politely. "Thank you." The attendant gestured toward the cabin, a quiet sanctuary of plush leather seats, muted lighting, and ample legroom. Michelle slid into seat 2A, near the window, placing her briefcase securely in the overhead compartment. She adjusted the adjustable headrest and settled in, letting the hum of anticipation wash over her. The cabin buzzed softly with the murmur of passengers, the clink of beverage carts being prepared, and the occasional announcement from the cockpit. Michelle took a deep breath and pulled out her tablet, flipping through notes she intended to review during the flight. As the flight attendant approached to offer refreshments, Michelle requested a glass of water and declined the pre-meal snack. "Certainly, ma'am," the attendant said, smiling. "We'll begin boarding shortly." Michelle closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the quiet. The flight was scheduled for 2 hours, enough time to catch up on emails and maybe a bit of reading. Suddenly, the calm was interrupted by a quiet but firm voice behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. I believe that seat is mine." Michelle's eyes opened slowly. The woman standing there was in business casual, holding a boarding pass in her hand. Her expression was polite but insistent. "I'm sorry," Michelle said, carefully. "My seat is 2A, the woman repeated, showing her boarding pass. Michelle blinked and glanced at her own boarding pass. She had seat 2A. The woman frowned, looking down at her boarding pass again, then back up. "There must be some mistake," she said quietly. "I checked my boarding pass twice." Michelle remained composed. "I also have seat 2A. Perhaps you could check with the flight attendant." The woman hesitated, then nodded. She turned toward the attendant. Michelle's mind flicked briefly to the logistics, perhaps a mix-up in the airline's system or a passenger accidentally assigned the same seat. It was a minor inconvenience, but she felt the familiar prick of tension settling in her chest. The flight attendant approached swiftly, listening to the woman's concern, then to Michelle's calm explanation. "I'm terribly sorry for the confusion," the attendant said. "Let me double-check the manifest." She tapped on her tablet, scrolling through passenger lists. It appears your boarding pass is correct, ma'am. I apologize for the error. Let me find an alternate seat for you." The woman's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Michelle offered a slight smile. "It's no trouble." As the attendant walked away to resolve the seating, Michelle felt a flicker of unease. The air, once smooth and steady, now felt just a bit strained, like a taut string ready to snap. She glanced out the window. The runway stretched out beneath a clear sky, planes taxiing in orderly lines. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, warm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight today with clear skies ahead. Thank you for flying Air Dominion." Michelle leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The tension eased but hadn't disappeared entirely. This was supposed to be a routine flight. She was supposed to relax, to recharge, to get home. But sometimes, routine was only the surface of a deeper current. And she could feel it now, just beneath the calm. Jessica wiped her forehead with the back of her hand as she briskly made her way down the aisle of the first-class cabin. The past several hours had worn her down, a non-stop cascade of demanding passengers, spilled drinks, and the kind of requests that tested her patience at every turn. She told herself she was almost done. Just one more stop, then the relief of the galley and a few minutes to breathe. Then Michelle's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, could I please get some clarification on the meal options?" Jessica barely glanced up, her voice sharp and clipped. "You heard the announcement. The options are listed there." Michelle smiled gently, trying to keep the tone light and polite. "Yes, I did, but I just wanted to double-check whether the vegetarian option contains dairy." Jessica's lips pressed together. She was tired. Too tired to explain again. "It does," she snapped, her voice harsher than intended. Michelle's eyebrows lifted, not offended but surprised by the sudden itch. Jessica exhaled sharply and moved to walk away, but Michelle's polite tone continued, a little softer now. "Thank you, I just thought I'd ask before choosing." The line snapped. Jessica's hand shot out before she could stop herself. The slap landed clean across Michelle's cheek. A gasp rippled through the cabin like electricity. Michelle's eyes widened, stunned. Her hand went to her face, fingertips trembling. For a moment, she couldn't believe what had just happened. Around them, the other passengers froze mid-sip, mid-conversation, mid-bite. Some instinctively moved closer, others whispered behind cupped hands. A man in the corner pulled out his phone, fingers already tapping. The hum of the engine seemed to disappear, replaced by the charged silence of disbelief. Michelle, despite the shock, remained composed. She lowered her hand and took a slow breath. Her eyes scanned Jessica, who stood rigid, jaw clenched, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and something darker, frustration mixed with regret. Why? Michelle's voice was barely audible, yet it carried through the quiet cabin. Jessica didn't answer. Instead, she turned away abruptly, retreating toward the galley. Her footsteps echoed, uneven and fast. Passengers exchanged glances, some shocked, others outraged. A whisper spread. "Did you see that? She just slapped her. This is unacceptable. Someone should do something." A steward nearby quickly approached, trying to manage the rapidly escalating tension. "Please remain seated," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed his own surprise. Michelle sat down, hands folded calmly in her lap, as a knot of emotions swirled inside. Confusion, disbelief, and a slow-burning resolve. Jessica leaned against the galley wall, eyes closed for a moment, steadying herself. Her hands clenched the counter. This was not how the shift was supposed to end. The flight attendant supervisor hurried over after hearing the commotion, her expression tight with concern. She nodded to the nearby steward and then focused on Michelle. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked carefully. Michelle touched her cheek and shook her head slowly. "I'm fine." "Shocked, but fine." The supervisor glanced toward Jessica, who was now avoiding eye contact, biting her lip. "We'll handle this," the supervisor assured the passengers over the intercom moments later, though the murmurs didn't quiet immediately. Phones kept rising, people capturing the moment. Social media notifications buzzed on screens before the plane even touched down. The rest of the flight became a tense blur. Michelle sat silently, feeling every eye on her. Some passengers gave small, supportive nods, while others seemed more interested in the spectacle. Jessica stayed mostly in the galley, barely speaking. Michelle's mind raced through questions. Why had Jessica snapped? Was it exhaustion or something deeper? Could she have prevented it? And what would happen once the plane landed? As the seatbelt sign flickered on and the captain's voice announced their imminent arrival, the cabin's mood shifted slightly. The unseen storm had passed, but its ripples lingered. Michelle exhaled slowly and straightened her shoulders. She knew the fallout was just beginning. The hum of the plane's engines masked the tension brewing inside the cabin. Jessica sat rigidly in her jump seat, her jaw clenched, eyes darting toward Michelle every few seconds. The flight crew gathered in the galley, voices low but heated. "We need to get ahead of this," Jessica's supervisor whispered, glancing nervously at the monitors displaying the passenger feeds. "This could blow up faster than we think." Another crew member, Mark, shook his head. "Michelle's the problem." She provoked. Jessica talked back, refused instructions. "We have to frame it like that." Jessica's fingers curled into a tight fist. The words stung, but she said nothing. Meanwhile, in the cabin, several passengers had taken out their phones. The incident, which had started as a tense exchange, was now being recorded from multiple angles. One passenger, an older man with thick glasses, whispered to his wife, "Did you see how she spoke to that flight attendant? Unbelievable." Another, a young woman in a bright scarf, murmured, "That's not right. She didn't deserve that." The comments and shared clips on social media began pouring in almost instantly. Hashtags like #FlightFury and #StandWithMichelle trended within hours. Back in first class, Michelle sat upright, cheeks burning with embarrassment but her eyes fierce. She wiped away a tear and stood. "I want an apology," she said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers and crew alike. "From the airline. From Jessica. And I want a full investigation." Jessica's eyes narrowed. her lips pressed into a thin line. Overhead, the captain's voice came through the intercom, calm but formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are aware of an incident on board. Please be assured the matter is being taken seriously. We appreciate your patience and cooperation." At the airline's headquarters, management scrambled. The PR team prepared statements, damage control plans, and briefing notes for the CEO. "This can't go viral," one exec stressed. "We need to control the narrative, make Michelle look like the aggressor, Jessica as the professional under pressure." But the social media storm was already a tempest. Michelle's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages flooded in from friends, family, and colleagues. "Are you okay? Don't let them gaslight you. We're proud of you." Her younger sister called, voice shaky. "I saw everything online. People are angry. You're not alone." That night, Michelle sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the endless flood of news stories and comments. Her parents sat beside her, their faces a mix of worry and pride. "This is bigger than any of us thought," her mother said softly. "But you stood up for yourself." Michelle nodded. "They want to blame me, but I won't back down." The next morning, the airline released a statement. "We regret the incident on board Flight 724 and are conducting a thorough investigation. We thank our passengers for their patience and remind everyone that our crew's safety and professionalism remain our top priority." It was vague. It was safe. But it wasn't enough. Across social media, support for Michelle swelled. Calls for better training, accountability, and respect for passengers echoed louder. Jessica's attempts to justify her actions fell flat as videos and eyewitness accounts contradicted the crew's narrative. The pressure mounted. Michelle's colleagues reached out, some offering support, others cautiously waiting for the dust to settle. And in the eye of the storm, Michelle stood firm, ready to face whatever came next. The moment the news broke, it felt like the world stopped spinning for a second. Across bustling newsrooms, glowing screens, and social media feeds, the name flashed in bold letters: FAA Administrator victim of racial discrimination and abuse of power. For Michelle Harris, the weight of the revelation hit like a tidal wave. She sat frozen in her living room, staring at the TV as the anchor recapped the story, voice grave and unflinching. "This is Michelle Harris," the reporter said, the Federal Aviation Administration's top administrator, publicly identified for the first time as the victim in a disturbing case involving racial discrimination and workplace abuse. The camera cut to footage of the viral video showing Michelle confronting the airline's internal harassment. Inside the headquarters of Sterling Air, the tension was palpable. Executives gathered in the sleek glass conference room, the hum of whispered conversations filling the air. CEO Robert Ellison paced anxiously, glancing at his phone every few seconds. "This is a PR nightmare," his communications director, Lisa Chen, said bluntly. "Social media is lighting up. News outlets are lining up for interviews. The story isn't just about internal harassment anymore, it's about race, power, and accountability." Robert ran a hand through his hair. "Jessica's been suspended pending investigation. But that's only the beginning. We need a full plan. Damage control. Fast." Lisa nodded, already typing rapidly on her laptop. Back in her home, Michelle felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. The anonymity was gone, but the truth was finally out in the open. Her phone buzzed non-stop messages of support from colleagues, civil rights groups, and even strangers who had followed the story unfold. One text stood out, a message from her younger sister. You're so brave. Proud of you. Tears welled up. Michelle wiped them away and took a deep breath. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been silenced. Newsrooms across the country ran with the headline, FAA Administrator Speaks Out, the Face of Courage in Fight Against Workplace Racism. Commentators debated fiercely, some praising Michelle's courage, others questioning the airline's policies and leadership. Civil rights leaders demanded a congressional inquiry. At Sterling Air, the board convened an emergency session. The atmosphere was tense, the stakes high. We cannot afford to be seen as dismissive or defensive, said Robert. This is about restoring trust with our employees, customers, and the public. One board member added, Jessica's suspension was necessary, but the root of the problem runs deeper. Lisa chimed in. We're launching a full audit of company culture and policies. External consultants are already being contacted. Robert exhaled slowly. Good. Let's hope it's enough. Michelle, meanwhile, prepared for her first public interview since the revelation. Sitting in the studio, she faced the camera with quiet dignity. I want people to understand, she said, voice steady, that this isn't an isolated incident. It's systemic. And it takes all of us leaders, employees, communities to confront it. The interviewer nodded. What message do you have for others who might be facing similar challenges? Michelle's eyes flashed with determination. You're not alone. Speak up. Demand change. Because silence only protects those who perpetuate injustice. The story continued to evolve, with new details emerging daily. Sterling Air's stock dipped amid investor concerns. Calls for regulatory scrutiny grew louder. And Michelle's name became synonymous with resilience and the fight for justice. One evening, as Michelle closed her laptop, a notification popped up, a live feed of protests outside Sterling Air's headquarters. Crowds chanted slogans demanding accountability and reform. She smiled softly, the sound distant but powerful. Change was coming. The office was empty when Michelle finally let herself breathe. For hours, she had sat under the relentless glare of cameras, microphones, and probing questions, her every word parsed, judged, and amplified by a public hungry for answers. But now, as the last echoes of the press conference faded, a quiet settled over the room. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, eyes tracing the ceiling tiles as if the blank pattern could offer some clarity. Humiliation lingered like a cold shadow. Not from the incident itself, that was something she had rehearsed countless times in her mind, but from how small and exposed she felt under the spotlight. How her carefully constructed armor, built over years of navigating a male-dominated aviation world, seemed to crack with every headline. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the framed photo on her desk, a younger Michelle in her crisp flight suit, smiling beside a plane she helped certify. That was before the battles, before the whispered doubts in boardrooms and the sideways glances in hangars. She remembered the first time someone told her she didn't belong. It was early in her career, barely a year out of training. A senior engineer had dismissed her report on a critical safety concern as overly cautious, suggesting she was too sensitive to technical nuance because of her age and gender. Michelle had argued. She had fought to have the issue addressed. Eventually, the flaw was corrected. But the message was clear: proving herself was a constant uphill climb. Now, years later, the stakes felt infinitely higher. This incident wasn't just a workplace disagreement or a technical dispute, it was personal, public, political. Michelle's mind flashed to the viral video, the endless news cycles, The social media storm. Was I too quick to speak out, she wondered. Did I open a door I can't close? The weight of expectation pressed down. Her colleagues called her a hero behind closed doors, but she felt anything but. Alone in her apartment, Michelle replayed the moment the accusations first surfaced. She had sat stunned in her living room, the news anchor's words echoing around her. Michelle Jensen, a leading safety inspector, accused of negligence, negligence. The word cut sharper than any personal insult. She thought of every hour spent poring over blueprints, every sleepless night worried about passengers' lives, every compromise she had refused to make. And now, this. Tears came unbidden. Not just for herself, but for the countless women and minorities who faced similar battles, their struggles minimized or erased. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a stern but encouraging reminder to stay strong, to hold on to integrity no matter the cost. But strength was exhausting. The next day, Michelle found herself wandering through the airport's quiet hangar, away from the cameras and chaos. The scent of fuel and polished metal was oddly comforting. She ran her fingers over the smooth fuselage of a jet, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders once more. This was why she had started all those years ago. Not for accolades or recognition. For safety. For justice. For the people who trusted her expertise. But doubt still gnawed at her. Could she withstand this fight? Could she protect herself without losing what made her who she was? The thought was almost paralyzing. Later, at a small cafe near the airport, Michelle met with an old mentor, a retired engineer who had guided her through her toughest days. He listened without interrupting as she poured out her fears. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. Michelle, your work has always been about more than just machines. It's about people. That's why you care so much. He smiled gently. And it's why you're exactly the person this fight needs. That night, Michelle sat by the window, watching planes take off into the dark sky. The runway lights stretched like a promise, steady, unwavering. She didn't have all the answers. But she knew one thing. She wasn't alone. And she would keep fighting. The morning headlines screamed in bold letters from every newsstand, website, and social media feed: passenger rights under siege, airline faces backlash. Michelle stood in her small apartment, phone in hand, scrolling through the endless flood of comments and articles. The public outcry was growing louder by the hour. Advocacy groups had taken up her cause, demanding accountability not just for her, but for everyone who'd ever been humiliated, dismissed, or worse, during air travel. Her inbox was overflowing with messages, support from strangers, offers of legal help, even invitations to speak at upcoming rallies. Yet beneath the swell of public support, a storm was brewing behind the scenes. Across town, inside a gleaming corporate conference room, executives of the airline convened. The mood was tense, the polished faces unreadable masks hiding fear and calculation. Potential lawsuits are flooding in, the legal counsel warned. Federal probes are likely to follow. We need a strategy fast. Michelle's case was no longer just a PR headache. It was a financial threat. Have we considered mediation? One executive asked, eyes flicking to the CEO. The CEO shook his head. Not yet. But legal wants to push back aggressively. If we cave, it sets a dangerous precedent. Back at her apartment, Michelle sat with her close-knit support network, friends and advocates who had rallied around her since the incident. They gathered around her worn coffee table, notebooks and phones at the ready. You're doing the right thing by standing firm, said Naomi, a seasoned community organizer. They want you to back down. But that's not how change happens. Michelle nodded, her jaw set. Her lawyer, Mr. Patel, added, the defense team will try to paint you as difficult, emotional, maybe even unreasonable. They'll use every tactic to discredit your account. Michelle took a deep breath. I'm ready for that. I just want the truth to come out. Meanwhile, Jessica's defense team was already hard at work. They released a carefully crafted statement, framing Michelle's actions as disruptive and uncooperative, trying to shift blame away from their client. In the background, they dug through Michelle's past, searching for anything to undermine her credibility. But every time the attacks came, Michelle's support network grew stronger, her resolve deeper. Social media was a battleground. Hashtags supporting Michelle trended alongside calls for airline reform. Videos of the incident circulated widely, accompanied by testimonies from other passengers who had faced similar treatment. Advocacy groups organized virtual town halls, inviting experts, lawyers, and affected passengers to speak out. Michelle spent hours crafting statements, preparing for interviews, and attending meetings with her legal team. It was exhausting. But each time doubt crept in, a message from someone she didn't know thanking her for her courage reminded her why this fight mattered. One evening, after a particularly long day, Michelle stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. The pressure was immense. The airline was a giant, with resources far beyond hers. But so was the movement behind her. She whispered to herself, "This is bigger than me." And for the first time, she truly believed that change was possible. The bright lights of the studio were intimidating, but Michelle took a steadying breath as she sat down opposite the interviewer. Cameras clicked, the red live sign glowed, and the hum of technicians faded into the background. This was more than just an interview, it was her voice, amplified to millions. Behind the scenes, her legal team and PR advisors had worked tirelessly to prepare her. The goal was clear: turn a personal ordeal into a movement exposing the airline industry's dangerous flaws. Weeks earlier, the airline incident that left Michelle humiliated and shaken had already set off a firestorm of quiet complaints and hushed conversations among travelers. But Michelle's decision to speak out publicly ignited a new intensity. Her legal counsel, Marcus Levin, sat with her during strategy sessions in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline. "This isn't just about what happened to you," Marcus explained. "It's about exposing systemic issues, how airlines handle safety, customer rights, and accountability." Michelle nodded, clutching a folder thick with notes, emails, and testimonies from other passengers who had faced similar mistreatment. "I want to make sure Jessica doesn't feel like she's alone," Michelle said. "And that no one else has to." Her public relations lead, Tessa Monroe, laid out the plan. "We're positioning you as a voice for all travelers, calling out negligence, poor training, and the culture of silence that protects bad actors." The televised interview was Michelle's first major step. The host's questions were direct but fair, probing the details of the incident and its larger context. "So, Michelle," the interviewer began, "what made you decide to come forward publicly?" Michelle's gaze was steady. "Because silence lets these problems fester. Airlines have systems in place to keep passengers safe, but those systems are often ignored or undermined. My experience was a wake-up call, not just for me, but for every traveler who's ever been dismissed or mistreated." She detailed the incident with Jessica: the abrupt removal, the humiliation in front of other passengers, and the lack of accountability afterward. The backlash was swift and fierce. Jessica, the airline employee involved, faced intense scrutiny. Social media erupted with opinions, some condemning her actions, others defending her, and many demanding answers from the airline's corporate headquarters. Michelle's inbox flooded with messages from people sharing their own stories, instances of neglect, discrimination, and cover UPS. Each story was a thread in the fabric of a much larger problem. Her legal team filed formal complaints, pushing for regulatory investigations. Tessa coordinated media appearances, opinion pieces, and interviews to keep the momentum alive. Amid the storm, Michelle found unexpected strength. She spoke at advocacy events, lending her voice to calls for better training standards and transparent complaint processes within airlines. Each appearance was a reminder that her trauma wasn't just hers, it was shared by thousands. In a packed conference room filled with journalists, activists, and industry insiders, Michelle stood at the podium, delivering a speech she had written herself. "This is not just about one incident," she said. "It's about the systemic failures that let fear, discrimination, and negligence go unchecked. It's about passengers who deserve respect and safety, not silence and dismissal." Applause rippled through the room, affirming the power of her words. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Michelle's legal battle was gaining traction. The airline, facing mounting public pressure and potential regulatory action, announced an internal review. They pledged to improve staff training and revisit policies related to passenger treatment. But Michelle knew the fight was far from over. "I'm not here for apologies," she told Marcus during one late-night meeting. "I'm here for real change." One afternoon, as Michelle reviewed footage of the incident for evidence, she paused. Instead of reliving the pain, she saw clarity, a path forward illuminated by her refusal to be silenced. She looked up, determination burning in her eyes. "This is my fight," she whispered. "And I'm ready." The cabin hums like a breathing animal before takeoff, a low, even sound that settles in the bones and convinces the anxious parts of you that this is normal, that hundreds of thousands of flights leave the ground and come back down, and in between there is plastic cutlery and tiny cups of soda with precisely 3 ice cubes and the occasional turbulence that will feel like a hand pressing your shoulder to remind you the sky has weather. I am in 22F, window seat, cool oval of plexiglass framing a patch of tarmac where a man in a reflective vest drags a cone somewhere and then drags it back again, his movements unbothered and repetitive, and I take comfort in that because repetition is proof of a world that keeps going, because the ordinary is a prayer you don't have to remember how to say, because I have done this route 3 times in my life and each time it feels like a slightly different version of the same movie. The people around me cast with new faces and old desires get me there. Keep me safe, don't let it be me who is the story. The plane smells like coffee grounds and lemon cleaner and hot dust, and my carry-on fits under the seat because I planned for it, because if nothing else I can control my luggage. The flight attendant in our section, Camila, according to the nameplate pinned neatly above her heart, the letters tidy as if they deserve to be pinned where a stranger might gaze, is moving through the aisle with that slick choreography that only people who spend their life in narrow spaces develop. Half step, pivot, check seat belt with the softest glance, fix a bin with a nudge of a hip, not a shove of a hand, smile, not the grin of an amusement park but the actual human thing that means, I see you, and we are all pretending to be light. And she makes a joke about the Jets playing a different kind of red eye this season to the man in 21C, and he laughs even though he looks like a person who hasn't laughed without thinking about it since 2004, and she leans into the row where the baby's cry is already the thready wheeze of an overtired throat and asks if they need water, warm water, a different kind of water, and the mom closes her eyes for a second in a gratitude that has nothing to do with hydration. And I watch because watching is the way I move through the world, a habit and an occupation both. My name is Nadia Reyes, 32, bilingual in English and Spanish, with enough French to order with confidence and apologize with nuance, a hospital social worker in the days and a midnight godmother sometimes to people who can't tell the truth yet, flying to Lisbon to watch my little brother marry a woman whose laugh starts in her stomach and flares up her throat like a bright scarf. I have the dress, carefully rolled, in my carry-on to avoid the nightmare of lost luggage, and in my personal item a small ceramic heart that my mother sent me when I moved to New York 10 years ago, wrapped in tissue that has been creased and uncreased so many times it feels like cloth now, the heart a reminder of a thing I believe and sometimes don't, that the delicate can make it all the way across the world if you wrap it right. Before the door closes, a man slides into 22E, the aisle seat, the kind of man your mother might caution you about in a bland way. Keep your purse toward you, not the aisle, but whose face, when turned toward the window light, is simply a face, a faded scar across the right eyebrow like he once forgot how to duck, eyes the color of slate, a wedding band not worn or shiny but matte with hues, the way gold gets after you stop thinking about it, and he tucks his backpack beneath his feet even though he could have stowed it above. And I read in the smallness of that choice a person who likes control but is not fussy about it. Long flight, he says in that soft, male, neutral way that means he is offering a social script and not insisting on a relationship, and I say, they all are, and we smile at each other and then look forward again because that is the choreography of seating in economy, a brief acknowledgement that the person beside you is not a threat and then a retreat to the small rooms of our own bodies. 3 rows up, in 19A and 19B, a teenage boy with the kind of hair that looks like someone cut it with the impatience of a person trying to beat a curfew has wedged himself next to a woman who must be his mother because he sighs at her the way sons do, theatrically, and she taps his knee to the rhythm of a song only she can hear, and he pulls out an old iPod with a scratched screen like an artifact, and I feel oddly sentimental about an object I never owned. Across the aisle, 22C is occupied by a woman in a neat blazer and a sensible purse who will later, I will learn, be called Petra, with vowels that feel like corners, and she is writing in a small notebook with a fountain pen, actual ink glistening on her fingers like she and words are in a real relationship, and I admire her for that too, even as I wonder why anyone would risk a fountain pen on a plane like this, as if the pressure might write a story of its own across the row. We push back, the cabin creaks a little as if the bones of the plane are complaining good-naturedly that yes, we're doing this again, all right children, settle, and the safety demonstration plays, the gestures still precise despite the 1,000 repetitions, and Camila stands just ahead of me and mimes the seat belt clasp with such attention that I feel briefly embarrassed by all the attention I have never given to small things, and then we are rolling, slowly, more slowly than my pulse wants. Because my pulse yearns to be done with the part where the ground is still so near and insists on having a say, the engines gather themselves like a breath before confession, and then we are off, wheels leaving tarmac with a tiny jolt and the city going soft below us like a rumor. I keep my hands open on my thighs because my father, a man for whom prayer was included in sarcasm, always told me that when you are afraid, open your hands and pretend you are generous, and that way your body can't tell if you're giving away fear or receiving courage. I would tell him that was corny if he were here to hear it, but he is 1,000 miles away and also 11 years ago, so I simply do it and watch the wing flex and the light along its edge blanch and then warm again as we slant into the clouds. At 10,000 feet, the cabin relaxes. At 20, the air changes like a room with a door opened onto it. At 32,000 feet, we are a tube of people doing their best not to think about the ground and the sky switching places, and the aisle becomes a river, the slow cart with its clink of bottles and the whispered requests, the person who must pee now and the person who always sits where the cart is, the dance of knees to the side and ankles tucked and a moment of human thigh against Human thigh and how quickly we retract, the lights dim to a polite dusk, then brighten to a simulated noon, then dim again as if the plane is trying to remind our bodies that time is an invention with terrible customer service. The guy in 22E Rowan, I learn later, from the way the woman in row 23 returns his book to him, "Hey, Rowan, I think this is yours," dozes and twitches, his head bumping the headrest like a person trying out a new pillow and rejecting it, and I read because it is the easiest way to keep my mind in a room I built myself, the pages heavy with the story of a woman who sells her memory for a living and winds up forgetting her own name. Occasionally I look up because I scan for comfort, because the world has made me into a person who wants to be able to point to the exit even if all I ever do is leave politely, and I watch the cabin crew. There are 3 in our section: Camila, a tall guy with gray hair cropped close and a posture that says he has been practicing professionalism since it was a hairstyle, his name is Kellen, which I don't think I've ever met as a name outside of a TV show, and a very young woman whose cheeks are pink even under the light makeup, blue so crisp I could cut my finger on the crease of her collar, nameplate tilting slightly, Ezra, who moves with an earnestness so tender I start to worry for her. Just by watching, they work like a trio that knows each other's rhythms, the way Camila flares and Kellen steadies, the way Ezra takes her cues like a musician who knows the melody but still enjoys being surprised. We are 2 hours in when the first unusual thing happens. It is small, as unusual things infinitesimally are before the stamens open and the pollinators arrive. The sound of a small argument a dozen rows forward, a man's voice with the tight pitch of someone whose authority is being newly questioned, a woman's voice that flattens to something quieter when she is afraid. Camila moves toward it like water finding slope, and there is a second where I can't see because the aisle kinks and the bin above 16C is down and someone's winter coat is slumped like a sleeping animal across half the aisle, and then Kellen is there too, and I see a man with a haircut that cost $50 to look like it wasn't expensive, pointing at the overhead as if he could reach through the plastic and touch the object of his vexation, and a kid 12, 13. Younger, with sleeve edges chewed to loops, mouth a line you could hang an empty picture frame on, his mother, I assume from the way she is both making herself smaller and not letting that keep her from being between the man and the boy, is conducting an apology with her hands open, and the argument is about the overhead space that the man believes he bought with the price of his ticket and the fact that the boy's backpack is now there because space is a common resource and we have, as a species, never once done well with those. "Sir, I can find you another spot," Camila says, that smile still on her face, but the smile is now a tool, not a gift, the way sometimes smiles are, or "we can put your bag under your seat for takeoff and then rearrange once the seat belt sign is off," and the man shakes his head because it is not about the bag, it never is, it is about not feeling invisible, and he says something about rules and about how you people are always changing them, and Kellen very gently lowers the bin with the weight of a person who knows the theater of mediation, and the boy's mother says "I'm sorry" again like it is a reflex the world has trained into her, and for a minute it looks like it will settle the way these things settle, a reshuffle, a small annoyance, the world turning its small stubborn wheel. Then Camila glances down at her sleeve where a slim crew device, an iPad mini in a black case with a ghost of fingerprints, every airline has their version, vibrates, the tiniest tremor of her wrist as if someone touched her in passing, and she looks at the screen in a way that is instantaneous and total, eyes skimming for information because information is what keeps jets in the air and people out of the news, and something happens to her face, some small unamiable contraction at the corner of the eye, the mouth, the place the jaw meets the ear, and she lifts her head, and for the first time since I boarded I see the person who holds the smile, not the smile itself, and I do not know her. The air doesn't change temperature, the lighting doesn't flicker, the bins don't crash open, but the mood shifts in a way I feel in my skin, a subtle recalibration like when the barometric pressure dips and your body remembers it used to live in caves and tries to make a plan. Camilla's voice, which has been golden and tapering like a candle, goes flat, and she says to the man, not loudly but without the padding of courtesy, "You need to sit down," and the way her mouth shapes the words makes it a command, not a request, and he startles because people like him are not often spoken to that way in public by women like her, and he starts to gather himself for offense, but she isn't looking at him anymore. The screen in her hand has lit her palm, she has a picture open now, a photograph that I cannot see in detail from where I sit but that glows with the unmistakable color of a school hallway, those beige and blue tiles that only exist in places where children are herded, a poster with cartoon animals half cut off at the edge, a row of hooks burdened with small coats, and between two coats an object that might be a backpack with a unicorn on it, and her mouth makes a shape like a door opening and then slamming. "Ezra, with me," she says, and the young one looks up from where she is offering coffee to 24A as if someone has thrown her a ball she wasn't ready to catch, and Kellen is already moving to take her place at the front because this is a dance and he knows the steps, and Camila leans into the interphone, the plastic one that connects the crew to the pilot and to the rest of the crew only, and speaks in a tone I can't doubt even from seeing only her profile, fast and low and clipped, an emergency register that tells the person on the other end how to assign weight to the words without any wasted syllables. People who have never worked in crisis think crisis is louder, but it is, at first, quiet, a narrowing, a pulling in, the way